So, good morning. Something shines out, a truth so self-evident that the words dictate themselves. We're cashing in on 1 billion years of planetary saving bonds, that's trees, and blowing it on assorted bling stuff. I'm going to come back to this towards the end of the talk again. Can digital technology help achieve education for sustainable development? I am, as Frau Ziegel said, I'm a professor at the University of Göttingen, and I'm also head of a department at the Georg-Eckert-Institut for International Textbook Studies. And at the Eckert-Institut, we take a cultural studies approach to education and to the media of schooling. And that means that although digital technology requires practical solutions for teaching and learning, and it requires new practical competencies for teachers and students, we approach it from more a focus on the fundamental cultural, political, economic, social transformations which result from the digitalization of our everyday life in educational organizations. And most of my research focuses on schools, so the stories I'm going to tell today come from schools, but a lot of the points are relevant for higher education or other forms of education. So it's from this cultural studies perspective that I want to answer this question today in 3 parts. The first part is yes, it can. Secondly, but it is currently not. And thirdly, only if we do digitalization differently can digital technology sustain or help or support education for sustainable development. So before I come to these 3 points though, as cultural studies people often do, I want to talk first about a word or a concept. There are lots of different definitions of education for sustainable development. I've picked one here from the UNESCO where they want to focus on improving access, and I'm not going to talk about access very much today. Heard Dehan yesterday talked about if you have no electricity, then digitalization is not going to be much of a topic. So I'm going to talk about the sections of education where there are computers and they do work. So access to quality education on sustainable development at all levels and in all social contexts to transform society, and this is going to be important for what I'm talking about today, by reorienting education and helping people develop knowledge, skills, values, and behaviors needed for sustainable development. It's about including sustainable development issues, so the topic, the learning contents, such as climate change, biodiversity, into teaching and learning. And individuals are encouraged to be responsible actors who resolve challenges, respect cultural diversity, and contribute to creating a more sustainable world. And I want to zoom in for a moment just on one concept, which is sustainable development. Now, today, these are, of course, very laudable goals, but sustainable development has become sort of an oxymoron in today's world. If development is oriented to growth and expansion and economic progress, then it is not sustainable. I think most people in the room would recognize or acknowledge that. And so I want to specifically understand sustainable development today as developing towards degrowth. That is an awareness that, especially in the global north, if we want to remain within our planetary boundaries, we have to stop growing, stop increasing consumption, stop increasing profitability, stop increasing GDP. And this is what Deborah Britzman has called difficult knowledge, because it requires truly transformative approaches, changing the norms and the values that govern most of our lives. It's difficult knowledge because it's not enough for each of us individually to consume more ethically or switch the light bulbs off more often. We're talking about systematic, large-scale political and economic transformations. And it's difficult knowledge because, as Slavoj Žižek, cultural philosopher, has said, most of us do know this already, the catastrophic and unsustainable effects of our daily lives. We know this, but we do it anyway. We know it, we acknowledge it, we're even here at this conference, but we do it anyway. So what can digital technology do to aid these transformations? So, the first part of the answer is yes, it can do quite a lot already. My research is based in ethnography and discourse studies, so what I'm going to do is tell some specific stories, very specific, which speak, I hope, to broader issues. So I've got a couple of stories. I want to talk about pedagogy and learning environments, about learning content, and about societal transformation. These are points from UNESCO's roadmap for implementing the Global Action Programme on Education for Sustainable Development. These are three aspects which are core to the definition of what sustainable development is supposed to do. So, first, pedagogy and learning environments. Digital technology has been used to improve access to quality education on sustainable development by enabling people to engage in learning activities from a distance. So online courses are available, often at no financial costs, MOOCs, massive open online courses, etc. Anyone can take these from anywhere in the world, theoretically. But the most effective courses have been more like blended learning courses, where there's a mix of online work, webinars, and face-to-face seminars. These personalize the content to a certain extent as well, so it becomes relevant to one's own life in one's own context. The Borderless School Initiative is a project in Southeast Asia, which has been written about here. And it brings learning content on sustainable living. They don't talk about sustainable development, they talk about sustainable living. To pre-service teachers through a mix of face-to-face interactions, webinars, and on these topics. After the course, the teachers expressed a really high level of sophisticated reflection, and they were asked, what's the meaning of sustainable living? And they said things like holistic thinking, a simple life, thinking and living and technology skills equal sustainable living. And living without causing harm, I'm quoting here, living without causing harm and not leaving the earth in a worse way, which I quite like. So this is a specific course on sustainable education, though. The second thing, learning content, focusing more on learning content, embedding ESD across the curricula is currently seen as one key way to enable what's been called double-purpose learning. So when you learn about science or geography or politics or whatever, at the same time as learning about ESD, education for sustainable development, related topics. And this book, which is available online, also has a lot of suggestions for what to do across all the content. The MGIP who wrote this are currently developing a similar thing for digital technology, but it's the same principle. So that in the digital materials that are made for schools, the content is embedded across. In this book it says, there are 4 ways of dealing with the challenges. The first is denial. There's nothing to worry about sustainable development. We don't need to, it'll go away. We don't need to do anything. The second is to bolt on, to add a green aspect. The third is the focus of this book, to build it in. To embed, here's the embedding, to embed sustainable development content to everything across all the curricula. We heard about this yesterday as well. The fourth is whole systems redesign, and I'll come back to that towards the end. So I've got one task, maths, from the maths curricula. As I said, the book has lots of different examples from lots of different curricula across curricula. But in the maths, this maths task here is a double page activity. I can't show you all of it, and it's probably too small to look at just now or to read. The point is just what it does. The maths task draws on open data, which is freely available online, and the book includes a whole list of open data sources where open governments put data online so students can use it. And it's one of these context-rich word problems that you probably remember from maths. But instead of asking students to calculate the profit from selling apples or something, or the percentage of tigers in the zoo population, it uses data on body mass index, on obesity, and on undernourishment. So it's doing the same maths, but it's doing it on this topic. Students learn the key mathematical competencies which have been written into the curricula for many, many years, and they double-purpose learning. They also learn about global justice, global injustice. However, even if the Borderless School project and the embedding of ESD across the curricula are using open data and things like this are innovative and dynamic. They're not yet signs of societal transformation, the third aspect that UNESCO foregrounds. And there are a couple of things that schools are doing already which point more to this direction. Repair cafes, for instance. Repair as a way of stopping the growth of consumption. There are over 1,000 repair cafes around the world. The closest one to Göttingen is in a school in Bad Soden-Allendorf, which I'm sure you all know. Bad Soden-Allendorf. But the idea here is the school is embedded in this idea of repair. You bring your smartphone or your tablet, or apparently your washing machine, which I can't really imagine, to the repair cafe, and it's repaired. So repair becomes not only a replacement of buying new things, it also becomes a community event. The community is engaged and embedded, and a collaborative fun event that you do together. The repair cafe is like every Thursday afternoon, or something like that. And then school projects have also been engaging with the shared economy, the sharing economy, with using platforms like Avocado for shopping, or Drivey and Snapcar for car sharing, or Free Cycle and Kleider Kreisel as e-Flohmärkte, right? E-flea markets. And also Code Check and Get Neutral, where you can calculate in an app your consumption, your CO2 output. So students are connecting with their community through these apps, because most of them are community related. They are encouraged to consume less bling, less stuff, and they're encouraged to cultivate more consumable, more sustainable ways of living. So the response, the first part of my answer, yes, it is. It can. But if societal transformation is the ultimate goal, and as I said earlier, if we want sustainable development to mean degrowth, especially in the global north, so that we live in within our planetary boundaries, and if innovative, collaborative, democratic, open, participatory, situated pedagogies, learning environments, and learning content are only the means to this end, then there's quite a long way to go. And I want to highlight 3 aspects here again: temporary technology, easy knowledge, and digital competencies, the way they are currently spoken about. Yeah. So, it's quite well known now that companies build obsolescence into the technology that they sell to us today. Now, imagine your daughter or your sister starts school in the 7th grade. The 7th grade is where most schools in Germany now are starting to integrate the laptops, the tablets, etc. So you buy, or the school buys, or somebody buys this tablet or this notebook. Now the government has made a change yesterday so that the schools can now buy the technology, which is already very good for access across the board. So it's not only the more wealthy parents whose kids have tablets who learn. That's a different issue. So your daughter or sister gets a new tablet in 7th grade. She's supposed to use this tablet or notebook for, if she's in a gymnasium, 7 years, right? No, 6 years. 6 years. How many of you have a notebook that's 6 years old? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not bad, not bad. But I think we can tell we're at a sustainable development conference, right? Because usually there's not that many people who have a tablet that lasts that long. But do you imagine this daughter or sister is supposed to write her exams, her Abitur or whatever, in 6 years with this computer that's 6 years old, right? It's not a way that we usually use technology these days. No. Okay, the basic idea behind this, we all know now about conflict minerals, we know about working conditions that are involved in producing these globally, and we know about the massive amount of digital rubbish which is generated worldwide by the amount of technology that is being purchased. And the question now is, if schools purchase more and more, are they thinking of sustainability as they purchase? It would be possible to regulate the kind of technology which is allowed to be purchased, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Just for now, there's a wonderful cultural analysis of digital rubbish written by Jennifer Gabrus here. which argues basically the digital rubbish, the amount of digital refuse and rubbish that we generate is not sustainable at the moment. Now, some of the critical literature on education for sustainable development talks about self-deceptive simulation, a sustainability mirage, or a societal strategy of self-deception. And the core challenge here is that much writing about ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, makes it look so easy. John Huckle has said this quite concisely, I think. ESD offers key concepts such as interdependence and quality of life, equity and justice, as if these are unproblematic and can readily be translated into the classroom without related considerations of ethics, politics, and global political economy. As if these are easy things to translate into practice. Oops. So in schools, we rarely talk explicitly and openly about the difficult knowledge of how living within our planetary boundaries is problematic, because it will mean massive, tough, and very challenging conflicts with personal local interests. For instance, now that we can buy, someone said recently, once you've bought pajamas from your sofa, you can never go back. Now that we buy more online, it's difficult to fly to my friends less frequently, especially now that I can look online and find the cheapest possible flight. And I know that if I buy on a Tuesday evening from the Microsoft computer, it's cheaper than if I buy at the weekend from the iPad, because it's different prices. It's difficult to fly less frequently. It's challenging to be the first country to aim to keep GDP stable rather than grow gross domestic product. And it's going to be fun to convince the shareholders of your company that you want to be the first multinational corporation that says, okay, we have all these digital traces of people's Facebook likes, of their Twitter behavior, of their online shopping history, of your search history, etc. We have all these digital traces. We know how to profile users quite precisely. But we're not going to use that data to target advertising at them. That's going to be difficult to use as well. And there are lots of statistics like this where you see the growth of e-commerce. The more digital technology we use, the more we consume, etc., etc. The repair cafes in the sharing economy are still tiny, tiny niches of the global economy. So, but consuming less in the world and formulating an education to consume less in the world is hard. It's not an easy knowledge. It's not an easy option. The third aspect I want to highlight here, very briefly, is the kind of digital competencies that are being prioritized worldwide. There are hundreds of models of digital competencies. They all have really nice aesthetics. And some are called digital intelligence, DQ. Some are called 21st century skills. There's a lot of technology in here as well, but it's always a bit more than just the technology. But what they all have in common, all these different ones, I know you can't read it just now, it's just to show the aesthetics. What they all have in common is that they pay almost no attention to sustainability at all. They all implicitly focus on using more technology to be more innovative, more creative, and often how today's students can stay competitive in a changing job market. This is only one, but there are a lot which focus on this, economic growth and becoming a successful player in an economic society. When they do have an attention to criticality, it's about critical awareness of cyberbullying or of fake news, but there's no more substantial critique of issues which are relevant to sustainability. And I'll come back to different kinds of competencies towards the end. So that was a long section on the yes, but. And sometimes the challenges seem much, much larger than the yes or the small projects which I mentioned in the yes part, which can sometimes lead to feeling disheartened, which is why the third part of the talk is very important. Can digital technology help achieve education for sustainable? Yes, if it's done differently. Current research suggests that it definitely can if we design technology and regulate technology use for schools and for young people differently. So, technology already has fantastic capacities to change the way we consume and make lives more sustainable. These are not often used. We know there are ways that cars could be made more economically viable. Scientists in the UK just discovered a way to make batteries on smartphones 60% more effective. The technology is there, but it's not being used yet. Which obviously, batteries on smartphones has substantial implications for energy consumption worldwide. So I want to suggest there are 3 qualities which need to be engineered into digital education for sustainable development. And each combine core aspects, core dimensions from the UNESCO roadmap. Durable convivial technology instead of temporary, difficult knowledge instead of easy knowledge, and post-digital competencies instead of digital competencies. Instead of digital competencies, the way they are described today in the broad scope. So the first point with durability and conviviality. If the market demands it, companies will usually make it. Durable technology that doesn't break too quickly. If the government now regulates that a specific sustainability index has to be met, then the companies will start to make it. We know that Apple, the teacher said to Apple last year, we need the iPads to be prüfungssicher. So that you can close down everything and the kids can only use one app so they can do their exams with the iPad. And Apple said, never thought of that, okay, we'll do it. So Apple's now doing that. Android's not doing it, Apple's doing it. So, and in that sense, China realized recently that the screens on tablets break quite easily if they're used in schools. Surprise. So China said, actually, most of what we're doing is using textbooks, so why don't we use e-book readers, which are so much more hardy and they last longer and they don't break so easily. But, sorry, this picture's not in color, it's supposed to be in color. The point is, e-book readers, as you know them, are usually black and white, right? So China said, we need color e-book readers, make a new technology, we need color e-book readers for the textbooks. And the market said, okay then, color e-book readers. And there are at least two different companies now that have color e-book readers, so the textbooks can be read, can be worked with quite well. Convivial technology. If you only read one thing to follow up after this talk, and if you don't know it already, I recommend The Matrix of Convivial Technology. There's an article in English available, open access, and there are some materials, pedagogical materials, especially in German, at least in German, available online, from Andrea Vetter. She has turned this idea from Ivan Illich, the term of convivial, as a technical term to designate a modern society of responsibly limited tools. And Vetter developed this outline into 5 different dimensions of basic ethical values and design criteria for technology. So we've got relatedness, she calls it in English, the impact on interpersonal relations, access, adaptability is called in English, which is the ability that we can change the technology to make it do what we want. You know, the iPhone is far less adaptable than, for instance, an Android smartphone or that sort of thing, or a Linux notebook. This one in English is called bio-interaction, the interaction with the biological world around us. And this one in English is called appropriateness, the amount of resources that a specific technology uses. So the students, in these worksheets here, students choose a technology, a smartphone or a microwave, and she has several of these sort of worksheets, like the kind of magazine quiz thing that you either love or hate. This is just one of them. There's one for each dimension. And then to the use of resources. You mark on with your smartphone or your Linux notebook that you've chosen. Is it very inefficient? Give it a -3. Or is it very efficient? Give it a +3. Is it made from non-renewable materials or from renewable materials? And I like the one at the bottom. It breaks easily. Or it's durable and repairable. And in one of the other sheets, there's a couple more questions about, can I repair it myself or do I have to take it to someone to be repaired? So this sort of thing, there's 3 important things about this idea of convivial technology for me. One is it raises students' awareness of the impact of their technology on the planet. on human relations and on global justice. It doesn't just raise students' awareness, it raises teachers' awareness as well. But secondly, so it impacts on the technology that we buy for schools. If we use this sort of analysis before we buy something for the schools, but maybe buy a different set of things. There are some schools, one in Göttingen, which is using Linux now, which has a completely different sense of answer here than Microsoft does. Of course, Linux is a little bit more lumpy to use. So there's a certain trade-off there. And thirdly, as I've said earlier, the hugely important task of regulating what will be financed for schools. If the demand is there, the market will react. So that was the first point. The second point, difficult knowledge, as opposed to easy knowledge or simple knowledge. I've said already a little bit about the difficulty of acknowledging what most of us already do know, that consensus is not always possible when we're finding ways of dealing with the conflicting interests surrounding sustainable development, especially if sustainable development is understood as degrowth. So dissensus is necessary. I have to thank the Thesaurus Plus for this because it's not Creative Commons. So classic pedagogical tools for engaging students with dissensus and difficult knowledge without necessarily offering a happy end are things like setting up dilemmas, tricky situations, alternative histories, speculative worlds, fictional worlds, or personal narratives. And these are things at which digital technology excels. And I want just to mention two examples here. One is virtual reality. There's some research now which shows that virtual reality does have an impact on empathy. And the jury is still out a little bit, but if you've used this 360 virtual reality yourself, then you realize it is a very strongly immersive way of seeing. And there are some films that have been made now, short films, that have been used in pedagogical contexts, specifically to engage difficult knowledge. This one, On the Brink of Famine, was filmed in South Sudan, and it aims to transport viewers inside the hunger crisis, in which more than 2.8 million people are going hungry and at least 40,000 are near starvation. So that there's a few different ones on different topics like this. And the second example, my favorite, is social impact games. Recent research on digital games has shown their potential to produce changes in attitudes and behavior, and the research here is a little bit stronger, that definitely has an impact, because the students do something. They don't just watch, they actually have to do something. But of course, not any old games or digital games produces transformative behavior. Games for Change, Games for Change is a non-profit organization that aims to empower game creators and social innovators to drive real-world impact through games. They curate lots of different sites on this one, the one website they have. And several of the games encourage students to experience or take action for societal transformation. There is a search button on the website, and you can search for key terms like sustainability, but it wasn't working last week while I was searching for this. These, however, are just the featured games from this week. And you can see alongside classic sustainability topics, you've got third world farmer, you play the third world farmer. You've got LGBTQ issues, and you've got the refugee issue. These are classic issues of sustainable development which touch on these different societal issues. But you've also got two that I particularly like here. Activate, this is just a snapshot of what was on the website this week. Activate, where you campaign for an issue. You play through the role of being an activist in this game. And these things are not always easy. You meet challenges and then overcome these challenges as a player, as a user. Practicing through what it takes to campaign publicly for an issue. And this one here, Ad Mongo, which introduces young children to ad literacy, to recognize why, where, and how commercial messages are constructed and placed, which to a certain extent also means understanding these data traces and what this means when your data has been tracked and traced everywhere. And they describe ad literacy as a key 21st century skill, which is not on the other 21st century skills maps. And this takes me to my final point, which is post-digital competencies. So if ad literacy commercial message literacy is a key 21st century skill. It's very much linked to digital technology, to learning how commercial messages are placed and how specific ads are oriented to me. But it isn't only about the digital, and I like this word post-digital because in our world today, politics and economics are talking a lot about digitalization, but actually, as if digitalization is something new. But actually, digitalization is not new anymore. Almost everything we do here, it touches on the digital, even for the most unconnected people. It's not possible to have a bank account anymore, even if you don't touch a smartphone or anything, without being involved in digital flows of data. So, one thing David Selby has called place-based learning as one final example for this. Cultivating an intimacy with nature can help build and deepen learner affinity with and love of nature, leading to an ethic of care, active care, and defense of nature, an ethic that is a springboard for action. This is one example, where he says you only fight for what you love, you don't fight for an abstract concept like sustainability. And this is post-digital, a post-digital competence to say, okay, when do I need to get out and be in nature, and when do I then use the tablet or the notebook to research how this tree in this forest is related to me and to the wider planet. That's post-digital competence. It's not an either-or, as it's often discussed. Either we're out in nature or we're using the tablets. It's somehow integrating them both. We use whichever technology is helpful for whichever task we have. And this takes me back to my initial quote, something shines out, it's just self-evident, that the words dictate themselves. We're cashing in on 1 billion years of planetary saving bonds and blowing it on assorted bling. If you only read 2 things following up from this talk, this novel is fantastic. It's a novel about trees, which is incredibly moving, strangely enough. So, and what one of the characters in the book wants to know is why this is so easy to see when you're by yourself on a cabin in a hillside and almost impossible to believe once you step out of the house and join several billion folks doubling down on the status quo. And we mostly know this truth. Education for sustainable development can give students the chance to be by themselves on that hillside, either in physical reality or in virtual reality, or preferably both, and work on sustaining that knowledge when we step outside of the house. So, to answer the question again, yes, it can. Digital technology can help achieve education for sustainable development, but it currently is mostly not. So only if we do digitalization differently, that means regulate differently, purchase differently, use differently, reflect differently, then can digital education support education for sustainable development. And with that, I thank you for your attention.